Hello and welcome back to another episode of our Mega-lo-Mania in Unreal Engine. So last stream was Tuesday, and at that point we got some of the core menu navigation working, fixed up some issues with the research, and got the game speed going. So that's where we are now. So I'm going to focus on the recipes of the technologies today, because I think that's kind of one of the bigger unknown areas that I have on exactly how that's going to fit together and how it's actually going to work. So obviously all of these technologies take a number of resources to produce, and there's pretty much in every case where the technologies are used, they're only available if you've got the resources. So they shouldn't show up on here unless we have the resources for them. They wouldn't show up in the combat unless they'd been researched, and then depending on if you've got the resources would depend on how many whether it says okay as it does normally, or whether it says like a hyphen to say they're not available and things like that. But it's predominantly here where it's kind of the opening part of recipes is used. But we also have the blueprint screen, or panel as it would be in this case, to display what recipes or what resources are required for which technology. So I'm going to put that in as well, just so that we can verify the recipes or the recipe, because it's a singular recipe per sector, but the recipe may be different depending on the sector. So just get the game up to cross-reference the details. Now I have looked at this a little bit, and we've created this data table, and it's got a lot of empty rows, but some of it is filled in. For say the rock, we have 3 recipes for the rock, and those recipes state that in one case it uses 1.5 bones, in the next it uses 1.5 rocks, and in the final case it uses 1.5 wood. So that's kind of what we want to utilize in this case. Now which recipe is used depends on the sector, so each sector has its own resources as defined in the sectors data table. So this particular sector, which is where we're starting, location 6, has rock, slate, solarium and herbirite. The other one has wood. So the key thing is that for sector location 6, we should see the rock recipe use rock, and then in location 10, we should use the rock recipe use wood. Obviously, we won't question the sanity in that because it's just a game. So we can just get into the game on our original and compare that information. So the way I I've thought about doing this is that we've created what's currently known as a player resource for all of the sectors. That simply says what the resource is, how many people are mining it, and how much we have. But that is used alongside the sector resource that includes, or maybe the sector resource is what we use and the player resource was used elsewhere. Let's have a quick check of that, because I think maybe one of them's an old one. So the resource is done actually within the sector. Yeah, so they're all sector resources. At least in there. Castle doesn't have anything, so yeah, I think I'm just exclusively using sector resources, not player resources, but that's okay. So this basically tells us what the resource is, how many we have, how many is available, and how many miners. The key thing here is how many we have. And secondly, we are using what we now have called, I think, player research. It's still called player research, but it is the updated one. So that's kind of, maybe need to rename these things moving forwards, but it's currently player research. And let's just think about this. So a complication is that we can't replicate maps, and what would be the most obvious way of dealing with this would be to add a variable in the player research, effectively for this technology. Would have this as resources. Oh, not research. Sources. And that would be a map. Not a map. Would it be a name, which is then a map to a number. And if we save that over here, so what we would be able to put in here would be, say, for example, that needs the rock, and it needs 1.5 of them. Obviously, I can't use 1.5, so use an integer. Change that. So it'll be a rock and 1.5. Now that would work, except for the fact that we can't replicate the map, and I don't know what it would do in that case for the clients. Let's have a quick check. Oh. So make a research. Okay, so this is the initialization of the research projects. This is where we create these player research objects, and the new property has been added, but according to the error it wants something for it. So this is all being done on the server at the moment, so we're just going to give it, we'll make it different than the one we coded in the other place, just so that it's obvious. And we'll save that, check that that works. Oh, I'm saying that probably didn't work very well. Was not the outcome I was expecting. I'll just redo that in the off chance that it was just a random unrelated crash. So we'll pick the top spot. Game again. No, definitely does not like that. I don't think that I make the structure anywhere else, so or even if I did, it would be telling me that I'd missed off the pin for that, so I don't have any real clues on why that's going wrong. It's maybe not quite the outcome I expected when I was trying to replicate a map, but it's not working either way. So I don't think anywhere because the property is new, I don't even use it anywhere, so I don't really understand why it really disliked that so much. But it doesn't like it, so let's go back and get rid of it. Maybe I'm just using the wrong game in this case. So I think it's all correct now. So just add it again, just in case. Some of the reason why it's kind of a final go. No. Attempted to add a map name float to a structure which is being replicated. Not sure if that would help much, but it clearly doesn't like doing that. So, okay, so as I said, I didn't think that they were going to work anyway. I didn't think that it would cause it to crash, but I didn't think it was going to work because there's clear indication that you can't replicate a map. And obviously for that to work, I define it on the server, and it will need to be replicated to the client for the client to actually use it. Perhaps that's why it's going wrong, because at the replication point it all goes wrong and then it crashes, but either way, that's not going to work. So storing the recipes within the player research is a little awkward, because we need to know the resource type and we need to know the quantity. But we also need it in a way that's going to be easily accessible, and obviously putting it alongside the technology would make sense. We do have, if we look back at our recipes data table, we do obviously have the name, which is currently in this case simply just an incrementing number. We could use the number to indicate which recipe. So let's go with that approach and see how that pans out. So in this case, we're just going to be recipe. Can't spell it now. Call it index. And it's going to be a name, even though that's a number, it's obviously stored and used as a name variable type. So we are initializing the research projects within the castle. Take off elapsed time, take off that one and that one. Now, unfortunately, at the moment, our castle doesn't have direct access to the sector. So I'll have to dig out how that is created and provide it with one. Don't know if I use this function yet. Been a while since I looked at the building construction part. Yeah, so this quick spawns the castle. Owner is a player controller. So it's a local castle reference. It does attach it to the sector. I thought that was the case, but where are we doing this? Event graph. So there's a potential that the initialized research projects will be called before our attached to server is called. Oh, sorry, attached to sector. I think that's probably the case. Yep. And that's why we can't reliably get to the sector from the construction of the castle, which is a bit unfortunate. We could do it in the tick and we can do it in the event here. I guess that should be called almost immediately afterwards. So that's called, attached to sector is called, and then that is called. So we could take that, put that here instead, and then in the, close all of those. In the initialized research, we have a building. Let's go to the building. That one. Get Play controller. Initialize paper stripes. Yeah, so we actually have a reference to the sector. Where's that used? Used in the sector. So yeah, okay, good. So in the event here, not here, where we're looking here. Basically that bit is setting up the sector reference. So in here, we know we have a sector now. So in here we can do find recipe for technology. May or may not be the right place to put it, but it'll work for now. So given a recipe for technology, given a given technology, we need to return the recipe that's not right, is it? No, it is right. Okay, never mind. Recipe index. And so we need the sector. Did I call it find? Everything has to go such a long way to get there. But should be fine for now. Pass in the right technology. So we're doing it here because the sector has the metadata, which includes hopefully enough information to find the right recipe. Actually, what we really just want the first recipe that the yeah, and I think the issue that I had with the recipes table before was that it's difficult to use the different columns. Can't remember if I was changing that. I think I was. Yes. Okay, so bit it was some time ago where I did the recipe stuff, and I kind of forgot where I left it. So basically, what I've done. See if I've finished it off. Let's just save this. think I need a new variable just to demonstrate this. And because of the way the table works, I need it at the top. Oh, I guess I don't need the order to match, but it's currently called JSON, so I'm going to have to call it JSON too. And then we need to put that. Nope, I need to get that right. So just update the file. It should notice the change, and we want to import it. Okay, we imported it as false. Obviously, that doesn't make any sense. JSON is not a boolean. Structure is not that. It's a name and a float. Looks familiar, but it's not going to be the same process as we had before. It shouldn't crash. Shouldn't. So I just need to re-import this data. So we go back over here. And hopefully, nope, that's not worked. Okay, let's just add one. This might have export as CVS. I've created it as JSON, and it's not actually JSON, is it, in that context? It's easy enough. Not easy enough necessarily. Let's just take that out. So we've got to try and figure out how to get the data right. So at the moment I'm building up in the spreadsheet. I have all the zeros and ones, much like we have in this case, all these columns, and I've used some spreadsheet logic to create what I've called JSON. And obviously that has worked. It is valid JSON, but the format that we need in this case is not JSON, and therefore it doesn't work. Okay, Slate and Rock. Just start this research so that we can compare, make sure that we've got the right thing. It takes a few minutes anyway. I'm just seeing now if I can just modify it. I think I can. be very pretty, but it should work. So at the moment I'm just trying to replace all the braces and square brackets, which is kind of the JSON approach. I think I need to do that. Okay, close. It's almost there. Just it uses brackets all the time instead of braces or anything, and just trying to get it to replace my brace. So I think if I did this, almost. One more squared bracket to replace. For some reason it's not quite replacing the last one. Well, according to that, it doesn't need any escaping. Still just trying to, so I've got the JSON string and I've managed to convert the opening brace and opening square bracket for the JSON, but for some reason it doesn't seem to have to take both. Definitely need those. This is rather frustrating. Okay, so have it. Now at least. Could do with some improvement, but we'll live with it for now, so we can get rid of that one. Replace that one. Import it. Nah. It's not worked. Don't know why it hasn't worked. And this is the file that I saved out, recipes X. We have recipe 1 with some stuff in it. And this is the file that I have produced. Now obviously it's got a lot of empty brackets, but that's okay. But the format of this, speech marks, 2 brackets, 2 quotes, name, colon, colon. One more thing to change. Colon needs to be comma space. There we go. So now we have all the recipes, and what we've got here is actually a map of resource to number, and effectively that does replace all of this table. So I'm going to kind of clean that up later on. We don't have our rock recipes, which is what we were going to work on, so I will drop them in now. So rock, you know, we had 1.5 on bone. No, 1.5 on slate, on rock, slate, and wood. So we'll just stick with the stone recipe for now. Sorry, the rock. So our values are in the right place. Okay, so the reasoning behind all that, despite the annoying title. I don't know if the title, I think the title just has to be the same as the spreadsheet, and it's currently called JSON, so I'm just going to leave that as is. I think what I'll do is I'll separate the spreadsheet so all the individual properties are on a different spreadsheet that's not included, and we just take these 3 columns. We may want to put all 3 of these in. No, I think having them separately works for the way we were going to approach it within the player research. So now we have the recipes, we can fill in this function. So we don't need the sector. What we need first is data table rows. So we need to get all the names for the recipes and iterate over all of those. We'll take a one with a break because we are going to be done at some point. Oh, no, that's not it. We obviously only care about recipes that are of the same, for the same technology. Do it that way round. Not really much point in doing a break in that case. There's only 4 items. So if we find a recipe that is of the right technology, we now need to go through all of our resources on this sector. Now quantity isn't important here, it's just we want the existence of those resources. So here I think is the right place to do it. We data table row. No, actually we need to do it sooner than that. Forgot that the name here is actually not the name of the tech. So all of these bottom properties we don't need. We only want this one and this one. Don't think we care about the false case. So for each of the recipes we get the data table row. We're obviously going to find it, so the out row is going to give us all this information. All the keys we don't need. So now we're iterating through the resources. This tells us, this set of keys here is all the resources we have or require for this recipe. We need to make sure all of them are in this loop here that we're going to go through. Just kind of thinking about it. Should be fine, yep. Just trying to set this up. Some approximation of what we're trying to do, and then we can see if we can improve it. So default match to true, continue until match is false. If we've completed, then we need to break this one if it's true. So do that. And there. Oops. Missed. So let's see if this works. That one. So it's only the name we care about in this case. Oops. Yeah, I think it's these ones we need to iterate over because they're what's required. That's just what's available. We need to go over both. I think an easier, slightly easier way to do it would be it's a bit haphazard, so we'll do it here instead. Just move that over. So we're going to create a temporary variable, a local variable to this function for all of the resource names. And that just simplifies the task later on. So resource names needs to be an array. So we create this this local property of resource names, and we do that just so that over here it's a little bit clearer what we're trying to do. Now we iterate over all of our required resources, and because this is just an array now, we can use contains. So we'll set the match property to true if both contains and the match property is already true. That means that if contains is false, I mean, we could probably just do that. Yeah, let's just do that. And if it becomes false, over here we will exit the loop. Otherwise we'll exit the loop at the end of checking all the resources, and if the branch is true we will break here. Otherwise we will go back to this loop and continue and check the next recipe for all of the resources required. Once we have it, what can we do? That's names to floats. I think just for debugging purposes. We'll print out a bit awkward because can't print the map. I think a potential solution here would be create a little library macro for it, global macro library. String map. Last time I tried to do this kind of thing, it didn't much like it. Probably not going to be particularly elegant, but we'll at least have the basics there. So the array element, and array index. No. See if that even works. Oops. Too far. I think it just might be too generic. Let's see. String. That's not right, is it? Because that gives us all the keys. The key should be that one. Too generic. No mind. We know what it is this case. So we don't need it to be generic. Is that happy now? Don't think it's actually got an error, but it's still complaining. So I'm just gonna get rid of it. So in our castle, we call this, which should at the end print that string, and return. See what we get. Nothing good. Okay, so it got stuck in an infinite loop. Where was the infinite loop? Oh, maybe that's got something to do with it. better. Must be in this while loop. Oh. Yes. That's kind of obvious now, isn't it? I don't think we need that anyway. There's only 4 recipes. If we do the and here like I did in the first place. Then match starts off at true. Contains and that is true, we set it to true, otherwise we set it to false. Once it's false, it remains false. So that will work. So in one case it said rock 17 there, so we're actually just printing out the index number and the technology name. And rock 17 should actually, sorry, rock 20 applies here, and where rock equals rock, and I think our sector has rock. Yes, so that seems to be working, though the debugging part of it is a bit awkward. But if it can't find it, it's basically giving me the maximum index, which isn't really what we want. So I think we need to create a index property. Set that, and then use that here. There and there. I'll tidy that up in a moment, just make sure that works. So in the case of recipes that don't have a text that don't have a recipe, we shouldn't see them at all. Because we're falling into a row not found in this case, which will return none anyway, so that should be okay. So we can actually reuse that. There. should give me the same output debug wise. Yeah, that's fine. So it's finding all of those. It's giving me a number for all of them. I'm sure if all of them are right, but yeah, some of them are none, where it hasn't found a recipe. So that's okay. So now they have a recipe index. Now what we want to do is simply not show them. Too many again. Here. UI. In the panel. In the research panel. So in this case we're adding the widget. What we want to do is check before we add it. So we could have a scenario where we already show the technology, and I do believe that if the sector runs out of the resource, the technology should go away even if you have seen it. So that's what we're going to do in this case. So in this case it says if it's unlocked. So that's the first thing. What are we looking at? Research panel. Yeah, so if it's unlocked, then we never want to show the widget. So that path is fine. If it is unlocked, so if it's not unlocked, we see if we've got a widget for it. And if not, we create one. So there's a bit more than that now. So we're going to say the player research has the recipe index. So we're going to need a function for this, I think, and it's going to have to be a global one. So we already have a variation of it here. So there's two scenarios here. This does need to know if you have enough, I think. Let's just check. So I'll put all the people on there just to make sure it's quick. And I'm going to quickly research both the rock and the sling. Well, actually, no, the rock and the stick will be quickest. I will also apply that information to the spreadsheet. Rock and stick. So in the recipes we can see that it uses 1.5 rock. We know that, that's what we've got. So a stick also uses 1.5 slates. That's not particularly great. Let's try the first shield. And it's not great because it doesn't use the same resource. I wanted to check what happens if you run out of resource. But we will put that in our table. So now the shield uses 2 rock. Okay, so we know that if we use up all the rock, we shouldn't be able to use a shield. So we currently can use it here. If we put down all these people. So it uses 1.5, but when you go low on the resources, and now we've run out, it mines it very quickly. So we've got 1 left. And I'd say our shield takes 2. So we shouldn't be able to do our shield. And it actually says so. That all reflects correctly. So now, a shield 1 takes 2 rocks. So I'll put that in my spreadsheet as well. So now what we want to do is research the rock and then see if the shield remains available to research even once I've run out of resources. So I should probably test it by beginning the research. Even if it's slow. So we should be able to do 66 of these, I think. There you go, and we should get that. So the delay and the lag here is when it's doing the speech. So obviously we've got 1 rock back over here. So the research is still going on. If we change now to something else. Yeah, so we can still research that. And I don't know if that's because we kind of held it, or we can always research it anyway. So let's just finish that research. Shouldn't actually be able to do it. Oh, can. How come? How strange. It's changed. So now it actually takes more slate. So we know that the stick takes 1.5 slate. Got a lot of slate to use. I don't know if I can use the shield without anything needing to be repaired. Has that used any resources? It might have. Don't know how many times I should be able to repair it. No, it doesn't seem like it's working. Need to use all of the slate and see if the stick weapon stays, knowing that the stick weapon will use 2.5. Sorry, 1.5 slate. So that uses half and half a rock, which isn't going to help us. Let's start over. So the sling, if we go back, use 0.5 and 0.5. So I'm putting all the numbers that I see, I'm putting into the spreadsheet, including the fact that we saw the shield twice with different values. So now if I get the sling first that takes 0.5 of both, I should be able to create all of every single sling that I can, and in doing so use up all the resources, since the minimum you can have is half. I think the maximum I mine in per sector would be 100, I think. Yeah, so 100. So that means I should be able to get 50. That'd be more than that, wouldn't it? I need 200. 200 slings. Okay, so I've used up all the rock. Haven't used up all the slate though. It won't even give me that last one sling. It's got stuck. But I think the entire second line, well, this shield 2 is gone. That means rock must be using some of the thing now. This has actually proved that it's slightly different than I expected. I thought when the sector and the technology was initialized, it would only ever use one resource, and it would be static. But this is obviously implying that the recipes can change, because I've never seen it use 1.5 slate before. I mean, I've got the recipe on my spreadsheet actually, but on this sector it's always used rock. So obviously if we run out of resources, the technology can change. We're out of slate now as well, so yeah, we can't research anything. But in this context, it sets what the resource is. Oh, in that, no, that was different than before even. It's odd that the sling in this case takes 1 rock, whereas the rock has always taken 1.5 rock. So it's actually more efficient to get the sling every time. It's kind of strange, really. You'd have thought that the rock would always be cheaper. One. Okay, so that changes things. Changes things completely. So the sling has 2 recipes. If we just update our data table. Too much. So we go down to our sling here. So I've added those 2 recipes in. One where the sling takes half of each, and one where the sling just takes a single rock. Now, I don't know how it decides which one it should use, because obviously you'd actually end up with more slings if you used this one. Now I think when I could do that one, when I did the order differently, I still had 1 rock left. Which means in theory I could have done either recipe. I'll just turn the speech off. It stops it lagging every time something happens. Now if the recipe by default was 34, half of each, you would then end up being able to create a lot more slings than you can create of rocks or slings of other recipes. And that's probably why we get recipe 35 first. So maybe there's just a priority, maybe there's just an order of which one it chooses. It could just be going down a list for all it matters and say, do you have the resources to this? I think that works. It just changes where so at the moment we're adding the recipe index to the technology at the point we create that technology. Yes, so what we did was let's give this a go. So we know if we research the rock first, it's always 1.5. I'm not quite sure what that indicates in a pinch, but always 1.5 rock. And we also know if we create the sling second, without using any resources, it should always give us the same recipe, which would be 1 rock, I would think. Because 1 rock is the greater version of these two. Let's speed the game up. Okay, so no, it's given us 50/50. But see, that still means that we've currently got 20 and 20. We know that the maximum of rock we can get is 66. Can't get any more. But slings are using 50/50, so we should be able to get twice as many of these. And we may even hit the, yeah, we're currently running out of population. We've got all of our rock because we used the rock first, so that was probably maxed out because of that anyway. We almost got all our slate, so we actually need 200 population, which we'll have to wait for, to max out the slate as well. But that's kind of emphasizing the point here. Depending on which recipe we get for the sling, depends on how many maximum slings you can produce. And also, if you produce any rock people, you're actually losing 2 slings. And to my understanding, the slings are the more expensive, or it calls it the catapult. But the slings are the better tech. It does more damage, you need less of them to do damage, etc. So it is a bit awkward. So my theory within the implementation is that we don't set the recipe index here. We set it when we unlock it. And all the research panel cares about is whether we have the available resources to make it. Quantity is important though, and unfortunately this function doesn't take into account quantity. So we're going to have to change that bit again to allow us to check the quantity, because things are dropping off this list when you don't have enough of them, even though that's hard to prove. So we should be able to get 200 slings. Yep. And we should have 100 of each of those. So now the pike was something that was provided to us at the beginning. We know that we can do it, although I don't know what recipe it will be if we were to do so. I have no recipes in my spreadsheet at the moment. So I don't know what the delete one does. Don't seem to be able to do it. It says use both mouse buttons, but doesn't seem to work. So I don't know what resources the pike's going to take, but I do know that it's going to be less than 100 and less than 50. So we drop down 105, and now we have 47.5, so we'll have to keep going. Take this down to maybe 75. Now we have 7.5. I think we should be able to still be able to create everything with 7.5. So we know the shield 1. Shield 1. We know shield 1 took either 2 rock or 3 slate. This shield here. So if we bring this down 7.5, so 10. It's 2.5. So this recipe now must be either 2 rock or something else. So if we bring in, how many more? 2 more. 5, just 2. Can't go back with this, so that gives us 1.5. And we can see that a lot of the recipes are now gone. All the shields, can't make any of the shields. We can seem to complete this. And the question that I have now is, what recipe is it going to give me if I do? 2 rocks. 2 rocks was our first recipe. 2 rock was valid when we started it, and 3 slate wasn't, I don't think, so that's fine. Now either 2 rock is just the first one it found, or it was the one that was available when I started it. I can't remember now. I think I had 2.5, so it would have been. The question is, would it be 3 slate by default? Can't really test that. I don't suppose it matters. Once it takes it off the list, you can never put it back on the list, unless it's taking something like the sun that we are. Let's dump a whole bunch of people on here. So at 2.5 we have the... Oh, we also have shield 2 back, so that must be able to take suns. But we also have the bow. A bow and arrow. Don't know. Again, don't know how many suns it takes. We've got 2.5. Actually, the shield's completely pointless. Too late now. So we can't use the shield, so I don't know if we run out of them. But the shield's taking 1 rock and 2 suns. I mean, let's just finish off the slings and see what we get. Okay, so only the stick and the pike can take 2.5 less suns. So what do we want to do? Get the pike. It does seem like there's some kind of order. If you do the research in the right order, you can actually produce a different and bigger army than if you did the research differently. I'll word that better. The pike's taking 1.5 suns. I'm fairly confident that I could have researched the pike without any suns, but that means it would have used the same as the sling of the rock. It would have used the rock and the slate, which means I'd only ever have gotten a kind of a subset of either 200 slings or 50 pikes or some variation of that. But now I can get all of the sun's worth of pikes. So I can get 9 with the current resources that I have. So if I just put some more back on here. Research comes back. So we can still do it. So now what I want to know is we know that this one takes suns because we started it with suns. I want to know if it will still take suns. Yes. Okay, so it looks like when a researcher started, it remembers what resources that technology is going to take. And then you can use that, or it uses that technology once you finish researching it. So I want to know how many maximum suns I get. 35? That's not many at all. That means I've only got 33 maximum and the funny thing is, in this case, because I've only researched 3, 4, 5, 6 things, I've not gone up in the tech level to get to the mine, and now I'm in a position where I've got no resources, there's no tech to mine, I can't actually go anymore. I've blocked this this sector from going up in a tech level. So while I've got a fairly decently sized army of 233 units, I can't really do anything else with this sector anymore. I don't think any of the text come through. Yeah, so key things are here, takeaways are that the recipes can change during the course of the game. They're not static. It'll pick the recipe at the time, I think at the time that researchers started, it'll pick the recipe that it's exposed that particular research for. So I need to account for that. This is whether I can account for that client side or whether that has to be done server side. But once the research has started, it looks like it's stuck with that particular resource set, recipe as I've called it. And once the research is completed, the resources of that research are the same. So they can't change once you've begun the research of it. So I guess what I can do is have the logic in the UI that picks out what should and shouldn't be shown based on current resources and quantities of, and it will show it if any resource matches. Yes, that makes sense. Not quite sure if we've got enough time to do that. So definitely says I have to modify this function. Not the macro library, function library. So in this case we want the technology and the resources, and that's going to be the sector resources array of, and that's going to be a name. So this is going to be very similar to my sector one. I'm just moving it so that we can work through it. So we'll take that. So this gives us a recipe for this particular technology. We then need to know whether we have all of the stuff that we need for it. So we get the keys, that will give us the resource name. So that will give us the resource names. Need to vary this a little bit. So we've got the resource names from this map. For each of those names, take this one up and over as well. for each of those names, we need to iterate over the resources. If they're the same. So this is we've found a recipe, so here. Find recipe for technology. So we found a recipe for the technology. Then iterate over all of the recipe's ingredients, resources. And for each of them, if we find the right resource in the sector, so I think it's at this point, we need to set this matched property to true. So if we find it, so if the required resource exists within this set, I think we need to do something slightly different here. Get this right. We need to set properties default value. We then need to go over all of our stuff. If we don't find it, we can't assume that it's matched correctly. And since we need all of them to be there, not some of them, get this bit correct. We're also going to need the quantity. The rest of it we don't need. So let's not set that yet. So that's how much we have, that's how much we want. So that needs to be greater than or equal to that value. We need both of these to be true. So in this case, we have not only the resource, but also the quantity required for it. think we can set that here. Because if it's false, we set it to false. Because it's false if we don't have a match, but we have to loop through to find the match. That's the bit that's a bit annoying, because that equals going to fail on a resource in the sector that isn't the one we want, and it shouldn't. Because a resource in the sector that isn't the one we want isn't a problem. So if it is the resource we want, well, we can just set that. If it is the resource we want, set that. Otherwise we ignore it and matched remains the same as it was, so that'll be fine. So we'll just print here, not required resource. Be a bit messy with all the debug, but if I don't output what I've got, I'm gonna find that it's not gonna work, and I'm not gonna know why. So once we've completed that, so once we've looped over all of the resources, we can say have required resources true or false. Technology. So I think we will. I can set the match property directly because it's an AND. Obviously doing that's not going to change the end result, but it gives me the false branch. So now we can say too few resources, too few of that for that. Oh, that is the resources. Don't really need to say. just make sure these aren't printing to the screen because it's going to be too much anyway. Actually, that one. So we don't need this one because this isn't. We haven't completed the loop of the required resources yet. So it's not too bad because that's only going to be a maximum of 4 things, and that's only going to be a maximum of 4 things. So there's only a maximum of 12 iterations there. Now, in theory, since this function is saying just whether we have the resource for that technology, not necessarily for what recipes, we could return immediately. So if we've completed that, so in this case we found a recipe. We may or may not have matched it. If we have matched it, matched will still be true. If matched is still true, then we can say we have required resources for that, and we can break. If we haven't, we can say incorrect resources for just say recipe not valid. Have required resources, yes or no? Well, obviously it's going to be yes now, so we don't need to do that. So what we can say is recipe quote so that's recipe ID, and then it's valid. Okay. So what we're going to do is put that into here first. Let's called has resources for technology. Create that. So we don't actually need to do this here, but it's a good single place where I can run it to verify that the result is expected. So you get a whole bunch of not required. That's not the output I'd expect in that case. So it is valid. Okay, that's the key, yeah. That one we want. That's the index of the recipe, not the other thing. The other thing was the index of the current recipe item. Stop again. So again, that's still not quite. Did I switch that one around? Not required resource. Where's that coming from? Yeah, so that one I think is not really going to be helpful, because that's just saying that the resource in the sector is not one that's required by the recipe, but it's going to print that a lot. So what have we got now? Recipe 7 for boiling oil is valid. So recipe 7. It's saying we need that and that. Game data sectors 6. Slomin Herberite. So that doesn't look right. It's saying that that works, but we have neither of those. I mean, we know that there's a recipe for boiling oil for solarium because we have it in this case. We had it available, but we didn't research it in this case. But that's clearly not right in this case. Quite sure where this too few rocks coming from. So we're not getting that as often as I would have expected. think what we can do, a bit more output. Recipe requires get rid of the quotes actually. So in this case we're going to say this is the element. Oh, it actually goes in that box. This is how much we need. And this is the recipe ID. And then we'll go here, add some context to everything. So check recipes for, and that's just the technology. Should clean up my screen a little bit. And it's going to print a lot more, but we should be able to follow it now. So okay, we're checking the recipes for the boiling oil. The recipe 7 requires those, and then it says it's valid. So here it's saying, in the case of boiling oil, it's saying recipe 7 requires 2 of Aldrite, I think. Our matched is set to true. We iterate over the resources. Okay, I get it. We don't have Aldrite in our list at all. So matched is going to be whatever the default was. I think what I need is a function for resource quantity. That will take name, let's call it required quantity, so we can take this. So we'll come into here and has resources default to false. Only if all of this is true. So we don't care about that one. We do care about that one still. I want to set that to true. just a convenience function now, so basically everything from that point on, just move over here. Quantity is that, name is that, and the resources is them. See if that makes more sense. So, take recipe of boiling oil. Recipe 7 requires 2 of those things. Recipe 7 is invalid. Recipe 8 requires 2 of those things. Recipe 8 is invalid. So, recipe 14 for longbow. I'm guessing that just doesn't contain anything. Yes. So that's technically true. What we want to know is whether it's 20, 21 or 22. That one. So for longbow, for pike, for rock. So recipe 20 for 1.5 of rock, we've got too few rock. So 20 is invalid. Same for slate, slate is invalid. Wood is invalid because we just don't have wood. So I guess that's the one thing we miss from this information is why it's invalid because we don't have any of it. So has resource will be false if we have too few of them or we don't have any of them at all. I don't think there's any way to differentiate cleanly. Yeah, I suppose we could restructure this. The only thing we're missing from the output that I can see is really just is simply saying we've got too few, but we don't have a bit of text saying we don't have any, or this resource isn't available in this sector. And I could restructure this so that the sector object is stored, referenced, and then checked later on. So the loop only does the find part of it, which would be fine. That way we'd get the resource. So do that first. We don't need a break because we're only ever going to have 4. So then we can go is valid. check. I suppose it's just got stuff in it anyway. Let's change that to found. Gives us something to check about against even. So now we branch. If it's found, so now we can say required resource name not available in sector. Return false. If it's true, then we want to check the quantity. Move them out of the way. Quantity check here. So if the quantity is greater than or equal to we return true. Should be fine. That should just clear up our logs. It's not a problem because it should still be readable in here. So we're checking the recipes for boiling oil. Recipe 7 requires that. That's not available in the sector. It requires that. It's not available in the sector. So 7 is invalid. Obviously, as we say, we could have skipped the second check, but there's just not enough resources there to worry too much about it. But an inevitable result is correct. So boiling oil, all the rest of it. So recipe 21 requires 1.5 slate, which it says there's too few of. So that's invalid, so on and so forth. So that's okay. That seems like the basic check of this function is working. Now, to actually use that in the research panel, we're going to say if it's unlocked, we remove it and we don't want to show it. If it's not unlocked and we don't already have it, at the moment, if we do already have it, because we've knotted this, so what I'll do is change that round, because there will be something we need to do in the true case. So if we don't already have it in the screen, we need to check that we have the resource for the technology. This is going to produce a lot of log messages, but I can remove them once I've got it working. Okay, so we'll just save everything just in case it goes horribly wrong. And run. So we're going to the research panel. Yeah, I got stuck checking resources for none, so that goes into there. It's true. Never be true. So just put that in place. Checking resources for, we need to find that additional log, I think it's here. Nope. Check recipe for none. Where is that? Here. So that seems to have worked and continues to work. Now we see quite a lot of resources from the start, and we see them simply because the recipes don't exist for them. There's no valid resources. Now they're in the recipes system, so what I could and probably should do is anything that hasn't got a recipe yet, exclude from the spreadsheet, but that's not a problem because I'll fill them in. At some point, everything will have at least one recipe. Now, recipes do appear. The rock, for example, did appear because the rock has recipes, but when we first start we have no resources. Now they're coming in quite slowly, but at some point we get the required resources for those things. So we need 3 slate or whatever it was, 2 rock or 3 slate for the shield, which takes a couple of seconds once the game starts. Let's run it again. So it's very slow now. Should be slow anyway. Oh no, the resource gathering isn't affected by the time of the speed of the game yet. Haven't done that bit. Definitely do need to do that bit. It's potentially something that I'm going to have to do separately. At the moment, the research is done based on continuous ticks, so frame rate ticks, which means I have to make sure that I throttle those to the speed of the game. Whereas an alternative way of doing it would be to have a separate kind of tick process. Basically, it's a timer that deals with everything in that way. And that way I wouldn't have to make sure that everything was throttled to the game speed because the tick timer would be called appropriately. But that's something else to think about. Key thing at the moment is that resources aren't throttled by the game speed. That's okay, but the research is showing the correct research as it should, and to the best that I can tell. There's no performance impact of the the effort that the UI is having to go through to identify those things every frame. Okay, so that bit's all not necessary anymore. Caught too much there. That bit, it's not necessary. Obviously have to try and improve the output, or at least the positioning of, at some point. So my theory is that this basically determines if a recipe is available, and I probably need to reuse this function for the things. So yeah, only determines if a recipe is available, and it's sufficient in that case, as in it won't scan the entire table. But there is a scenario where I can't assume the table is ordered, and I will need a function that returns all the recipes for a given resource. Sorry, a given research. So I have to factor that in. And it might just be worth changing this function, so rather than it returning a true or false, it returns an array of the names of the of the recipes. And that means it will be more usable in other cases. It's just the overhead of doing that. I can't think of a more efficient way. So I guess the other way would be that I could shortlist the recipes. So I could, at the beginning of the game, at the beginning of the sector, I could get the recipes that are applicable to all the technology. But that's going to be well, I don't think it will be as many recipes as I've got, because I could end up with hundreds of recipes. There we are. Technologies. Isn't helpful. It's 28 technologies. That's not too bad. Even if everything had 3 recipes, that's still less than 100 different variations. There has to be a limit of how many different recipes a given thing can have. How I find that, I'm not really sure. I'd have to see if I did see some recipes in some other information that I had, so I'll have to see if that information is accurate. I think that may have been why I thought that it was wrong, because things can change, the recipes can change. See if I can find it in here. Anyway, I think that's where I'm going to stop tonight. Turned out that obviously it was a little bit more complicated than I thought, based on the variations of stuff that can happen, variation of recipes. I think the core concept was correct in terms of how I I'm sorting out the data, the recipes within this JSON column, for want of a better name for it, are working. I can use them. I can use them fairly efficiently. This check resource function seems fine. I can obviously give it a technology, give it a resource, give it how many I want of that resource, and then check all the resources for it, and that can be worked. I mean, I could probably separate this part of this out to another function, just have three, so that a third function works in the middle and says, for this technology and this resources, do I have it, or for this recipe. So I might do that just to refactor this a little bit and break it down, but that gives me three functions, and one of them may not be useful on its own. I think this function will be useful on its own because I'm going to need to know if a particular resource is available at quite a few occurrences outside of a full-on recipe as well. But yeah, so a little bit more difficult than I thought. Caveats that I didn't think of, complications I didn't think of, but the data's there. It's just a matter of working through it, and I've actually proved that it does function correctly with the research panel. Obviously, I've got to take things away if we run out of resources, which is why this branch is there and ready for that. Because if the widget exists, it has to check this anyway. If the widget does exist, it needs to remove it. So I'll probably put this check before this check. Basically check you've got the resources for it. If you do, add it. If you don't, remove it. If we don't, yeah, either way. Got to do that. Got to remove the text if we don't have the resources for it. Whether that allows the user to research it after they run out of resources or not, I don't suppose it matters too much. Obviously the current game allows you to, but it's pointless because you'll never be able to make it. So, as we've seen. But yeah, that's all for now. Hopefully I'm going to be able to kind of find some time to fill in the gaps, put some more bits and pieces together and continue on, but otherwise next stream should be in another couple of days, hopefully sometime over the weekend, and from there we should be able to kind of implement more of the resource related technology specific things, iron out some of those areas where the resources should be used but aren't being used. So yeah, thanks for watching. That's all for now.